Welcome to Partnerships for Profit, the podcast where we bring you inside the world of joint ventures, strategic partnerships, and powerful collaborations. Each episode, you'll dive into conversations with top entrepreneurs, visionaries, and business leaders, unlocking the secrets to building profitable relationships that drive growth and success. Whether you're looking to expand your network, find new referral partners, or scale your business, you're in the right place. Let's get started.
Welcome to Partnerships for Profit, presented by Leduc Entertainment. Today, we are joined by Yoni Kozminski, the founder and CEO of MultiplyMii and Escala. Yoni, welcome to the show.
Adrian, it's a pleasure to be here. I've just been bopping along to the intro music. Love it.
You like that? Every time, it's funny. It's every time it plays, I'm like behind here, like back behind the camera going, do, 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 do.
I was doing the same thing.
Well, can we start off? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, and can you tell us a little bit about MultiplyMii and Escala?
Absolutely. So if I'm coming in clear, you'll hopefully hear that my accent is still that of the Australian origin. Grew up there and have spent the last 10 plus years actually out of the country. My career up until sort of 10 years ago was in creative advertising and digital marketing, working with clients like Sony, MasterCard, Mercedes-Benz, Medtronic, everything from web design development to content production, TV commercials. We had, when I was in LA, we had a 10,000 square foot production studio downstairs. So that was a lot of fun. And then I moved to Tel Aviv now nearly 8 years ago and got my hands, or rather feet, dipped into the world of e-commerce in a more meaningful way, and was able to successfully scale an e-commerce business from 2 to 5 million that was acquired. And I would say that was really sort of the catalyst. The entire journey up until that point were the fundamental building blocks. What I was able to do to help that business grow was build an entirely remote team that was Philippines-based, that was the engine room that really drove the growth. And so we sort of built what MultiplyMii is today in its embryonic state, in its beta, if you will, inside of that e-commerce business. And essentially what MultiplyMii is that solution on steroids. We will come in and help companies understand how to build profitable remote teams, or effectively build profitable companies leveraging remote teams. And that's effectively our story and our journey. I've started sharing with people less than 5 years ago, we put $100,000 into this business. We're now, an 8-figure plus business, bootstrapped, and we've done that with a 95% offshore team. And so that's really, if you sort of look at like what we're trying to share with the world and what MultiplyMii does in conjunction with Escala, which is our management consulting practice that sort of gave us the tools and capabilities to assess a business, understand its operation, and sort of fit it out to understand what roles can you hire that are remote, how do you structure them, how do you onboard them, and how do you do this in the most effective way possible. So that is probably the most succinct I'm going to get my entire life and career in a handful of minutes there.
I was going to say, I love that. That makes my job easy, right?
I'm here to help.
I'm curious, when people come to MultiplyMii, what are some of the pain points and problems that they're experiencing that you're helping them solve?
So it's on a scale. People will come to us for a variety of lenses, and often we're actually helping reframe their thought process and their logic. I would say sort of from the most basic needs, people have heard of this thing called offshoring, and they think that they can get these virtual assistants, VAs, to do sort of baseline tasks. And a big part of our job is to say, well, you're not thinking big enough. You can actually bring in highly capable people and deliver them in, proper accountabilities in your business, hiring people offshore that you would have effectively had onshore. And so that's sort of one of the key pain points, is understanding who they are looking to hire and what does it actually look like to step into that world. When you get to people who are sort of more advanced or deeper in that journey, it's about how do you do this in a professional and efficient way? How do you build the standard operating procedures? How do you build that onboarding strategy and planning that's really going to see you succeed in integrating and largely onshore team to having an offshore footprint? So I'd say those are just a couple of the top of my head pain points that we're trying to solve for people, and they're quite frequent in terms of the how frequently they come up.
Right. Well, and I'm wondering, with this business, what are some of the challenges that come across? Obviously, operating across international lines, like what are some of the challenges that come across with that?
So there's a tremendous amount of challenges that
I mean, there
come.
have to be, right?
Yeah. And it's not that we've solved all of them, but we definitely are giving it a red hot crack, as we would say in Australia. And so when we talk about the challenges in establishing an offshore business, an offshore team, the first is, I would say, how do you break through the communication or cultural barriers? I think the first
Right.
step is that you're used to working with a particular type of individual that's either in your immediate geography or in your country at large. And so you have degrees of understanding. I'd say people from New York, quite different to those of the West Coast variety, and probably different again to those in Missouri. And so so there are differences, but they're marginal. Those barriers are very easy or relatively easy to bridge. When you start working across the world, all of a sudden there's in ways, or sometimes there's a language barrier. Fortunately, we specialize in Filipino talent, and everyone speaks very, very good English. Higher education is done in English, but it's how do you actually get to a position where you have enough trust and clarity that there
Right.
can be healthy discourse. So if I'm going to run an effective business, I don't want yes men and women. I want people who are challenging the questions that we are sort of presenting to them and coming back with solutions or saying, I don't understand. I don't want a yes boss, no boss type relationship. And so I'd say that's probably one of the fundamentals is how do you bridge that cultural gap and how do you make sure that you're actually getting the most out of it? I would say some other challenges that immediately then follow from the types of questions is, well, what do I do about time zone? I'm on Pacific
Right.
time. They're nearly 12 hours apart. How do I possibly work where they're not on the same time zone? We're helping people build working schedules that effectively allow them to do in much of the time 24-hour production cycles. So if you can build in an asynchronous working environment through really structured onboarding and setting out clear KPIs, expectations, performance management, metrics, and a system where you're getting those perpetual feedback loops, then all of a sudden your onshore team has been freed up considerably.
Mhm.
Your production cycles are
Right.
reduced, and you've built this force multiple leverage with talent that's going to cost you, in the vicinity of $1,000 a month for a full-time team member.
Now, this might be a little bit of a loaded question, and I'm sorry if it is, but what kind of an impact did COVID have on working internationally?
Yeah, it's
I
it's
mean, because you
not
were coming right
it's
on the
not loaded.
backside of that, right?
You've kind of teed me up to hit it right out of the park here.
Oh,
So
good,
thank you, Adrian.
perfect.
So we actually started building the business in September of 2019, and we
Right.
went to market in January of 2020 was our very first client. And anyone who's listening to this is probably well aware that come March the whole world shut down, and so I would say the immediate impact for us was pretty detrimental. All of a sudden,
Yeah.
you had this situation where it wasn't that people didn't want to part with their money, it's that no one wanted to make any sort of movement because there was just such a high degree of uncertainty. You didn't want to change anything in those early stages, but we fortunately had designed our organization with a remote first mindset. So we weren't working out of offices. And, just for context, you can commute literally 5 miles each way in Manila, and that can take you north of 2 hours to achieve that sort
Right.
of very small distance. So that was always sort of from starting this business off, it was really important to me that not only are we paying healthcare and social security and HMO and PhilHealth and all the benefits that are mandated by the government, we're doing everything legitimately, but also I didn't want anyone to have to do that type of commute. I used to commute from West Hollywood, sorry, commute from Venice to Hollywood and back.
Yep.
And that was, at least a couple of hours a day that was
Yeah.
time I wasn't getting back. And so I didn't want to create that reality. So coming back to the impact, people very quickly actually got comfortable with working remotely with local talent.
Right.
And so the gap, I would say, in sort of the space of 12 months, it went from people didn't want to try anything to people actually started to get a feel, or it really pushed that experience of remote work much further into the future. We were already established to be able to handle that, and that was sort of the mindset we had going into this business. So I would say, like, it's really helped our business. I think we got in at a good time, because now people are comfortable working with remote talent. The notion of offshore doesn't seem as far as it once did, and forced to build much more comprehensive systems to be able to do things where you can't just turn around and tap someone on the shoulder. So I think net, it's been pretty good for us.
Well, and I'm curious, at what point did you realize, when you were building this business, at what point did you realize that you needed to split and make Escala a separate business and its own entity, as opposed to being a part of MultiplyMii?
Now you're touching on loaded questions in the bane of my existence, Adrian.
Walking on eggshells over here.
The simple explanation is that what Escala is a process improvement management consultancy that's born off of talent that came from Ernst & Young. And we effectively took a team formerly out of EY, had all historically worked together, but were no longer working there, a team of 5. And we took a baseline methodology and we designed a system that was more amenable to small to medium enterprise, a sort of a vertical or an industry size that they're just not interested in. Like the dollars that we charge for our projects are like rounding errors for them. And so it was, how do you educate a market that has never seen what process improvement looks like? Going in and trying to explain what process mapping and SOPs are to onboard talent more effectively. That's almost like speaking a different language to a lot of small to medium enterprises. And I'm talking about businesses that might be doing 5, 10, 50, $100 million. I'm not talking about, someone who's just started yesterday, but these are just not things that are, it's a very corporatized delivery, and that's how they are able to scale in the way in which they're able to scale. And so I sort of looked at it and said, we can either have MultiplyMii staffing and MultiplyMii consulting, and then we have to really explain the difference, or we can build a separate brand that's very, very specific, helps, educate the market on what it is that we do, and really niche down. And so that was the reason why we did it before, or circa 4 or 5 years ago. Today, we are working really, really hard to bring those back together, and hopefully a year from now, there's just the one MultiplyMii brand, because the value proposition of what Escala's capabilities can achieve when you wrap that into MultiplyMii is pretty considerable. So I'd love to also not be marketing 2 brands.
Right. Now, again, this is going to be one of those drum roll. This is another one of those loaded questions, right? We've talked a little bit about how COVID, kind of impacted what you were doing. So that's kind of the past. But I want to talk a little bit about the future. And, in this e-commerce space, I think a big kind of topic of conversation right now, everybody's AI. And I'm wondering, looking forward and maybe even currently, how is AI currently affecting, and how do you think it will continue to affect the e-commerce space? Loaded question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a deep one. It's a deep question. I think I've done a lot of thinking about this topic, in recent weeks and months, specifically around the offshore remote work environment. I've really looked at it and said, does this sort of cannibalize an entire industry? You were looking to hire people remotely because the cost was cheaper, and now there's this AI. If you're a really good prompt engineering individual, can you actually replace people? I would say, from the lens that I'm looking at, specific to remote talent, I see it as, again, just another added benefit to accelerate your ability to have, an even more valuable team member from that lens. Now, if I look to sort of wrap this into what does that look like for e-commerce, I mean, we're in a physical products business. Margins are very tight. cash conversion cycles are really tough. I think it's one of the hardest things when you look at an e-commerce business is the more you grow, the more inventory, the longer the lead times, like all of a sudden it becomes sort of always a financial challenge as a business to grow. You need more capital to grow those businesses. So I would say AI is likely, much like how I've been looking at the world from an offshore talent perspective, I see it as an enabler, when it comes to things like chatbot, everything from the e-commerce founders that I've been speaking to lately, they're doing really interesting customer support calls and checkups through AI, voice agents. Like there's a whole lot of now added capabilities to be more omnipresent when it comes to the relationships you're building with your customers. And that's just one sort of example that I'm seeing as a use case. But, I believe that it really empowers them. And for those who are in e-commerce, particularly those who are doing sort of under $10 to $15 million, it's a much more challenging game today, unless you've got really heavy inbuilt margins to make that business make sense. If you're sort of north of 50 million, it becomes a very different game that you're playing. And so I would say that AI is probably going to, hopefully, for e-commerce founders, help really sort of close that gap and give them tools and capabilities that will enable them to get to a good outcome faster.
Well, you mentioned at the head of the show that you worked with global brands, MasterCard, Sony, Mercedes-Benz. And I'm wondering sort of what inspired your move away from working with those sort of global brands into focusing on scaling e-commerce businesses. How did that kind of transition take place?
So I would say just from, sheer happenstance and the journey that I took, I had left, about 10 years of creative advertising across a number of agencies. And when I moved here, I had started my own agency and it was going great. I think by month 3, I was doing about $30,000 of monthly recurring revenue. And that was just me as the solo founder. And I had a handful of small resources. And I realized about 6 months into that journey that I didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy it for a couple of reasons. I'd say the first reason is I was really tired of making idiots rich in the most polite way possible. And when you're running an agency, you're getting a piece of the pie or a piece of the puzzle. But if you can have a holistic view of a brand, you can have a lot more impact. And so I would say those were the two components. And so then I said to myself, and I'd say the other and probably the most important one that I realize now is I'm only good at a handful of things. And you can never be the best at everything. And so I really wanted to have a partner or partners that had skills that I didn't, and that would allow me to really sort of sit in my zone of genius, the area that I'm most passionate in. And so that was sort of the 3 things that happened. I went on a journey to sort of look to see if I could find partners or a partner. And I found these guys who had this e-commerce business. And we went into talks about how, what it would look like to wind down my agency and come and start working with them in the business. And so that was the journey. That was sort of the shift from it. I would say, if I'm like really blunt about it, agency life, anyone who's listening who is running an agency, I mean, it's really hardcore. The difference between being client side and agency side is you're actually doing all of the work. Your hands are, your knee deep in the actual output of the work that needs to happen. And you've got, the marketing team, brand side just sort of giving you directives and giving you sort of general direction. And they're more project managing while you're doing the creating. I enjoy the creating, but just the pace and the hours and the requirements and the thankless work, it wasn't it for me. And yeah, I mean, really fun. But again, what I've realized about myself is I really like to be more across what's happening in the business and not be super siloed into like a social campaign or a TV commercial. I like to be able to sort of touch and feel and see the broader implications and impact. And I think that's probably why you go into becoming a founder.
What are some of the common challenges that e-commerce businesses face when they're trying to scale?
So the first thing that I'm always going to come back to, particularly today, gone are the days, 2014, 15, 16, 17, where you could, throw a few shekels into a business and see it scale. You need to have either serious capital, and minimum tens of thousands, but realistically, like into the hundreds of thousands of dollars to build a meaningful product, unless you have absurd margins or incredible lead times, or you've been able to sort of game the system to your, to your will. So I'd say like capital is going to be a considerable position. Margin compression today is enormous. If you look back at, for example, Amazon as a marketplace 5 years ago, I think the revenue, or sort of the attribution of the total revenue and profitability of Amazon's mothership, and media spend was a very small component. I think it's maybe the largest, if not one of the largest sort of verticals where they're generating growth in the business. So it's now a lot more expensive to buy media on a platform like Amazon, as well as when we look at Facebook and Google and all these platforms and sort of the wars that Apple will have with privacy with these other businesses. It used to have a lot more ability to target and retarget a lot of brands. And so your ability to actually get in the viewpoint of your target audience has become considerably harder in like meaningful ways. So I think the technical skill sets needed to be able to achieve this level of success is not what it used to be. It used to be, I would say borderline easy. At a point, I was the largest media buyer in Australia when I was buying ads for Mercedes-Benz in, I think it was like 2010. And, we were spending like $200,000, $250,000 a year. People can spend that in a day today, like easily. And so it's crazy. And that was yielding you, hundreds of thousands of likes and engagements, and it was just a very different world. We're going back 15 years ago. So so essentially it's shifted considerably. So you need to be coming back to, I can sit here all day and tell you challenges why it's hard in the e-commerce space. That is not, I don't want people to listen to this and say, oh well, I'm not, it's too hard. You can still succeed. It's still there. I would say you just need to attack it with a much more serious degree of professionalism. You have to think through and build out the goals and the vision. What does your 1 year plan look like? What is your CAC, your cost of acquisition? What does your return on ad spend? What are all of these metrics need to look like for the business to be viable and go along that game plan? You just can't, it's not this just, game that you used to play where you just hear the Shopify app ding, 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 ding all day, and you're just getting sale after sale after sale. You have to work really hard for that now.
So we've spoken a little bit about MultiplyMii. We've spoken a little bit about Escala. I want to talk a little bit about successful scales. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
For sure. And it's actually very timely, Adrian. I started this podcast probably in the vicinity of 4 or 5 years ago. And I've got to say, one of my absolute passions, the role that you're playing here as host of a podcast, anyone who's thinking of starting a podcast, I would say just do it, because it's not, and these are the guys to speak to, but I would say the podcast I had, Successful Scales, was and is, because I've just relaunched it. My first episode in 2 years is coming out this week. So very excited to get that back going. Why I started in the first place was I wanted to talk to people. I used it as an educational platform, which turned out to be almost a business development platform without me even realizing it. And I think that's the way I approach life. It's about authenticity. And so I went into it from the lens of how do I build a platform where I can effectively have a conversation with anyone that I want to talk to and be able to have 45 minutes with them, asking them any questions that would interest me or the audience. I was getting access to a lot of great people, and I thought if I just hit record, I could actually help a lot of people go through this journey with me. And so that was Successful Scales. Now that my reality looks a little differently in terms of the time that I have, that I can actually start to invest in this again, I'm teeing up, I've teed up a handful of guests and started recording again. And yeah, I mean, if anyone's interested in learning about everything that relates to scaling a company, from how to buy media all the way through to management, and it's quite a broad spectrum. That's what I'm talking about.
Well, I don't mean to steal away content from your podcast by asking this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you could share with us, when you think back on all the people that you have helped through MultiplyMii or Escala, when you think back on the clients and the businesses that you've helped, can you share with us, is there a story that stands out in your mind of a business or a client that you really saw a positive transformation in as a result of your help and guidance?
I mean, not to sort of blow smoke and give us a pat on the back of how great we are, but I've seen a lot of I've definitely seen a lot of that, and I think the proof is in the pudding for us, where I think it's about 65% of our growth comes from existing businesses. So people who tend to work with us continue to work with us and build larger teams, and that's that's what we're hoping to achieve. Less about our growth and more about their growth and how that becomes a win-win. But I would say, if being put on the spot and thinking about one story that stands out to me in particular, we worked with a couple of guys who had effectively taken over a family business. They, it was a successful business that had been run for about 20 years. And a guy and his brother-in-law actually came together and took over this business. And it had been run for many, many years. We came in and did a process improvement project. And at the end of it, we really helped bring a whole lot of clarity to how their business should be operating. They had a lot of sneaking suspicions about, I would say, team members that had been in play for extended periods, and sort of the investment versus return in their output. You had these people 10, 15 years working in the business that had a lot of IP, but weren't really sort of moving the business in the direction. So on the back of that experience, they actually made some personnel changes. And this was probably a couple of years ago. Within a year of working with us, we'd helped establish an entire operating framework for their business. We documented their current state and built a future state, more optimized business, and built a roadmap on who to bring into the company as they scaled. I think they've hired about 10 to 15 people with us to date. And in the first year, is about 10 people. And through that experience and through that journey, I mean, they're a testimonial on our website, on our MultiplyMii website. So you can, I mean, it'll be pretty obvious to see who they are, but ultimately, they're so grateful for it because it changed the whole way in which they're operating as a business. They're now more free time, more profitable, like running a proper organization, as opposed to being stuck in the weeds dealing with people that were not on the same page as them.
Absolutely. Well, Yoni, this has been an absolutely fantastic conversation, super informative. If anybody out there listening could use your help, could use the help of MultiplyMii, where can the people listening find you?
So the best place to find MultiplyMii is at the website, MultiplyMii. You can actually type in ME and it will redirect to the MII website now. We just got the domain, which is nice after so many years of waiting for it. And if you want to talk to me specifically, I'm relatively active on LinkedIn, Yoni Kozminski. You'll find me there. Always happy to have a conversation and would love to help in any way I can, whether it's our solutions or just the information that I've been able to absorb over the course of my career. Always happy to help first.
Well, Yoni, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been awesome.
Thanks a lot, Adrian. It was a pleasure.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. This has been Partnerships for Profit, presented by Leduc Entertainment. Yoni, thank you so much again.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Partnerships for Profit. We hope you've gained valuable insights on how to form profitable partnerships and take your business to the next level. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. Got a partnership story to share or someone you'd like to see featured on the show? Reach out to us. Until next time, keep building those partnerships for profit.